All right, Joe, we now discuss the battle over interest rates between the Trump administration and the Fed Chair Jerome Powell is the director of economics and economic freedom and senior research fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research, Peter Earle. All right, what gives? Why are interest rates so high?
Well, there's definitely a sense that rates are too high right now in the United States. Right now the Fed funds rate is 4.25% to 4.5%. You could make the argument that it should be closer to 4% or so. The reason why it's there right now is because the Fed wants to stay, or I'm going to use their words here. They say they want to remain data focused and prepared for when tariffs come because they're not sure what effect tariffs will have on prices. Now, I would say this. Typically, in theory, when you have prices, it's typically a supply shock, and you will have a single move in prices upward, and then that will be it. So I don't think that they're approaching this the right way, and it's starting to feed into the president's mood and into a lot of people's sentiment about the U.S. economy.
Inflation is down. Gas prices are going to be the lowest, in at least for the summer travel season, since I believe 2021. Unemployment is relatively low, and we just played that report from CNBC that says the tariffs are bringing in, hundreds of millions of dollars. So is Powell just being political? Is this just him opposing Trump or something?
Well, I mean, it is true that tariffs could complicate the Fed's job, but it's not really their job to deal with that. I mean, I could see why they probably think that what will happen is if tariffs are put in place and there's retaliation, that there'll be a back and forth of tariffs, and that will mean that prices will be rising. But if we have a single imposition of tariffs, depending upon the level, the Fed is supposed to look through that. So are they being political? There's probably a bit of that. They perceive their independence as being threatened. But I would also say that they're watching very closely about inflation, and they're also watching employment. The job market is good but not great. So I could see why they would be a little bit cautious. But I mean, two of the people in the FOMC, Waller and Bowman, have said they could see a cut as early as July. So certainly there are some people on the Fed who are leaning more towards what we're saying than Powell's position. Okay,
so what would have to happen? What metric? What would have to move where Powell says, "Okay, you know what? We're going to lower interest rates"? What is he looking for?
I think he's looking for one of two things, and maybe both. I think he's looking for a continued decline in inflation closer to that 2% level, which is pretty close to anyway. The thing is that the core rate has been kind of sticky. But if the Fed recognizes that they have, that shelter prices are contributing to it, I think they should make some adjustments for that. The other thing he'll be looking for strong weakness, or at least noticeable weakness in labor markets. Now, my view would be if he sees that, it's probably too late. We're probably already falling. So he's going to be watching the labor data. He's going to be watching the inflation data. He would probably want to see inflation falling and labor markets starting to sag. But at that point, again, like I said, it may be too late. So I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe he's very keenly aware of how many errors they've made since 2021. I count 4 errors so far, but I'm watching these things closely.
Well, okay, so 2%. Where you said we're near that 2% mark. So what if we got back to where Trump was back in 2018, 2019, 1.4%?
Yeah. Well, in that case, I think they would definitely, at the 1.8, 1.9%, 1.4% we saw, at that point, I definitely think that they would start to lower rates. But the thing is, the economy changes over time. That 1.4 or 1.5% might not be possible now. And the Fed is certainly not in a position to know it. Right. So, I mean, they should look at the economy we have and not the one we had or not the one we may have. And they should take into account, hopefully they are, that, maybe 2.1% is where the natural sort of rate of inflation is going to be right now. It might not be 2% or whatever. And also, like I said, they need to take into account the fact that there's some anomalies within the inflation number. We've had this high shelter number for a long time. I think that eventually that should be reviewed because it may be skewing the numbers upward when in fact, they're not really as bad as they look in that regard.
I just look, again, prices are coming down no matter what the Democrats say. When you have lower energy costs, that should bring down the price of goods and services across the board. Again, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on the nuances of minutia here, but if inflation is receding and inflation worries were what were keeping interest rates high, then maybe Powell should give us that, say, when it gets here, then I'll do the thing. I'll lower the rates. I'll give you the last 20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty noteworthy that in September of last year, right before an election, he lowered 50 basis points. And now, with arguably lower rates and arguably a slightly weaker labor picture, he's resisting that. He seems to be stonewalling it.
All right, well, it's not political, I'm sure. All right, sir, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me. Have a good night.